who is Karen? What do you do? Why do you do it? What's your deal?
Oh my God. Let's start with the easy question. So Karen stumbled into nonprofit land very accidentally, although when I look back, I think that it was always on the horizon. It was always there, right? I just didn't really realize that nonprofits were as fundamentally important as they are, but also that they operated as differently as they do. I went to school for international development and I have a double major in anthropology. So the anthropology piece is really useful, but nobody will pay you for that. And the international development piece obviously has a lot of nonprofit involvement, right? So that's a lot of integration between federal government's different funding organizations and then nonprofits that are actually executing programming on the ground. And then when we moved here, I had a friend who knew I was trying to get out of the house a little bit. I was like, hey, I saw this job with NEAT, and I had no idea what NEAT was. So I originally started here. I split a part-time job with another person, and basically I've just worked my way up since then. But NEAT aligns really nicely with my own personal values. I was raised in a somewhat fundamentalist Baptist upbringing that firmly believed in recycling and composting before it was ever a thing. So you know what I mean? Like all roads lead to NEAT, kind of. Tickles that nerdy side of myself, and I really feel like I found my people, and I'm really kind of excited about the future of this organization that I really appreciate. So yeah. It's changed a lot, right? So we started off, NEAT opened the very first recycling depot in town and ran that for a while, and then moved into education because it was cleaner and drier and less noisy. Yeah. And I understand that, right? Like completely. And then to do like that type of work for 20 years pretty much, and then explain to people that, no, we're actually going to go this way. Yeah. Right. Has been a little bit of a challenge, but it'll come.
Did just talk a little bit about NEAT, but just for the people that don't know, what is NEAT?
NEAT is the Northern Environmental Action Team. We started in 1989. We've been around more than 30 years now. And throughout that period of time, we very much have been involved in waste reduction programming, and most of that has been at the behest of our regional district. They're responsible for all of the provisions and the tools to manage solid waste. So the municipalities kind of feed into the framework that the regional district is responsible for providing. And then we provided all of education and outreach, community meetings, that type of thing. And that's how we really got into school programming. So we run 8 to 12 programming. This year's a bit of a challenge on that one, but we're making it work. And so looking at reduce, reuse, recycle, we're looking at how do you actually compost in the north? How do you actually make really positive, easy, not necessarily easy, but not super complicated either, right? Changes in your lifestyle that decrease your footprint and amount of waste that we're really producing. And then probably shortly after I came, probably 8 or 9 years ago, we really started looking at food and food as the waste reduction technique. Geographically, we are on a parallel north of Siberia. Very long days, but a very short growing season, right? And being the breadbasket of the area, a lot of grain, a lot of pulses, not necessarily a lot of horticulture. There's a big push to kind of shift that way. Going into 2018, we had a fundamental funding change, which would probably be the story of many, many nonprofits, is that, that stable piece of core funding really fell apart. So we completed our relationship with the regional district and went into 2018 in January, having laid off half of our staff, and we had to replace 70% of our core funding. So we were really in an interesting position. Framework and the foundations that we were starting to build in terms of food security really kind of came full throttle at that point in time. So we were able to turn up the gas under those programs. Ultimately, we're a tiny little organization. We try and punch much higher than our weight class, which is sometimes we pull off, sometimes we don't. But yeah, we're looking at fostering sustainable lifestyles, food security, and that type of thing throughout northeastern BC.
What was your professional and personal background?
I come to the blue bin story. Yeah. So I didn't take a career path at all, really. I spent 5 years at home with kiddos. Looking back, it was just so serendipitous, right? That this is where it started and this is where I am now. And I had done my BA coming into that kind of period of my life, and then took a bunch of time off, had all of the kids, and did the mom thing for a bit. And then really was like, I have words and I have thoughts and I have things that, you know, are bubbling up in my brain, and I need to kind of get into the real world again. So went back to work and really kind of fell in love with it. It's always been something that I, you know, have an affinity for, the, you know, and I think that's just being brought up that way, right? Like we always have that core, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle, kind of compost, sort of take care of what you have in front of you. I realized that really I had found my home. This was the place of all my nerdy dreams. I went back to school, and so I got a master's in environment and business, which obviously focuses on sustainability in multi-level organizations. So we worked on, you know, ISO standards and how do you actually create a sustainability plan? How do you integrate some of this stuff into the practical components of your organization? So that went everywhere from advertising and, you know, how do you avoid greenwashing? How do you send a message out that's appropriate? And, you know, what do people care about really? Basically, NEAT has been built up over the years. We have some really super fantastic people on our staff right now that are really leaders in their field. They know exactly what they're talking about. They know exactly where they're going, and we're going together, which is really the best part of it. I think the thing that I like most about this is that I'm super curious. Like there's always more to learn. And so I've just basically surrounded myself with people that know a lot more about all of the stuff that I'm interested in, which sometimes makes getting anything done a challenge. But for the most part, it's been a really a symbiotic relationship for the vast majority of the time.
What was the political and social context that really inspired you to join NEAT?
Like back in the actual day, NEAT was started by a group, and I laugh every time I think about this, but Andy Larstone was one of our founding members, as was Ruth Ann Darnell. And so I heard Andy describe Ruth Ann as the most frustrated recycler he had ever met in his entire life. Aww. And she and Bob had their barn just full of things that they knew was recyclable. They knew they could do it, and they should be doing it, I think is the bigger issue there, right? But there was no service available in town. And so that really was the instigation of this organization. And everything literally started from a barn out in Rose Prairie, basically, right? And I know, right? And so you think of where we are right now as, you know, an organization that certainly has struggled over the last couple of years, but we're bigger and in a place that they never ever would have considered, right? And we just have blown the original dream right out of the water, which I'm very proud of. In terms of politics and me, and I think politics came in after I got here, you know, and you just really start to realize how influential different levels of government is as it relates to environmental standards and environmental care. And I think one of the really interesting pieces of Canadian jurisdiction is that environment very much so is practically managed at the provincial level. And so that creates quite a few hiccups. And the federal government's announcement around, you know, single-use plastics and single-use item bans is really exciting for one thing, but it also is stretching the mold in another way, right? Because typically that hasn't been their wheelhouse, but they're starting to see that a large comprehensive program is going to be much, much more influential than, you know, 11 or 12 individual provincial programs. It all gets managed separately at a provincial level. And at some point in time, like I can just imagine businesses being like, just tell me what to do and just make it one thing. BC or Manitoba or even Alberta, right? We're just not big enough to really make it worth somebody's while to adjust the production or adjust their process in order to recoup those items. You know, big P politics and all sorts of things that happen. And, you know, is this actually my job? And is it the right thing to do? And is it my mandate? And, you know, there's a lot of space in the gray there.
What do you say is the most challenging thing about finding support for NEAT and politically in the community?
That is the $1 million question. So there's, I think, a couple of things that are happening. One, NEAT is a homegrown organization. Sometimes I think that NEAT is in that position of being that familiar local organization. And so sometimes it's like, whatever, I don't know what they're talking about over there. But we do have a lot of good stuff to say. But getting through that reputation is sometimes a little bit challenging. And I think that that would be the same thing politically, right? As an organization have fundamentally changed over the last 2.5 years. And we have, probably another 2 to 5 years to go in terms of completing that evolution of who we are and where we're going. And so we've asked people to really shift their mindset around who we are, right? And around what the services that we provide are. It's kind of like on a whim and a prayer, right? Like a little bit where, you don't necessarily see the impact of the work that you're doing for another 5, 10, 15 years, right? That's kind of in that space of social change that we're really trying to influence.
How would you describe personally your leadership style, and how do you think your leadership style contributes to your success?
I don't have any formal training in this. And so I think that there is a degree of like fly by the seat of my pants. I don't micromanage. It's not my thing. And some days there are benefits to that, and some days there are not benefits to that. So one of the things that I'm working on is, just accountability across the board, both with myself and with my staff, that we talked about this last week, and then making sure that the action items get attached to that conversation as well, as opposed to, hey, we had this great idea and we talked about it and then we did nothing with it. Which is the thing that I'm really trying to minimize, right? Trying to build here is really a trust-based organization. Saw that with a couple of other things, right? In that, this is your job. This is the thing that I employ you to do. And, people are welcome. They're welcome here all the time. And I would much rather deal with issues as they come up. I trust you until you tell me that I don't have a reason to trust you. That means you get the keys to the castle. You understand that I'm not a micromanager. I'm going to trust that you're going to do the things that you need to do. And I better hear that you have a problem with them, 3 weeks ahead of deadline rather than the day of. Right? We're all human beings. What I'm really trying to build is an environment of trust and vulnerability. And I try and be honest about my capacity, and I, expect that of them. The other thing that I'm trying to make super clear is that my responsibility is to my staff as people. The organization will be here. Right? You need to take your time, you need to do your things, right? And even just going through COVID, right? If you work from home, everybody's got a different situation, every experience that they're living. And, my commitment is to them as people, not necessarily to the organization as a whole. So
in your time working at NEAT, what's been your most proud moment?
I think just being here today is the biggest accomplishment. We had some scary times. Waking up in the middle of the night, not sure if we were going to make payroll, or not sure that I was going to have to fire my friends. You really trying to utilize the strengths that we had on staff. And I think that we've done that really, really well. The fact that it even exists is a little bit of a coup. There aren't programs like that in other communities. Nourish would be another one. Food rescue that works with the Salvation Army to make sure that, food that would otherwise go to the garbage is reaching people that really need it. I think the willingness to sit down and actually hammer out innovative, impactful and efficient partnerships that really have brought us this far.
What skills do you think are most valuable to working in the nonprofit sector?
I think a sense of humor probably is topping that list, both with not taking yourself too seriously, but also being able to laugh through that crap. We'll see if the lights turn on tomorrow, what are you going to do? I don't know. You laugh or cry, and I would much rather laugh. Being able to describe what you're doing, who you're doing it for, why you're doing it. And it's that why piece, right? That why are we actually doing it? Because that's the connection piece to the community. We are, canning food that we get donated from the grocery store because there are people in our community that are hungry, right? People are like, right, I get that. I understand that. That makes sense to me, right? All of those things are the why. And those are the pieces that really build the connective tissue between us and the community. Some financial savvy is also a good thing to have. How do you fit into the community? We have no option to be selfish with our programming. We built partnerships. We built lots of things because we couldn't afford to do anything otherwise, because it made our programming better, able to continue doing that. It's a small town, as you know, right? So there isn't a lot of luxury in terms of redundancies. And, we have 4 organizations doing the same thing. There's just not a need for that.
A research question about the needs or context of your community. Anything that you'd like us to look into for you guys?
That is currently, now that we solved the payroll issue, the thing that is currently keeping me up at night is is how do we manage change in a predominantly oil and gas area as it relates to climate change and the local economy, but also as it relates to climate change and agriculture and climate change and, you know, some of those other things. Agriculture is obviously still a very strong and important piece of our economy. But what I'm struggling with is the knowledge that Suncor and Shell know that climate change is a thing. Is reflected in their business plans. They are ready and waiting, and they are building wind farms, and they're building solar farms, and they're building and investing in other pieces of energy because they are energy companies at their core. A local economy and in a small place, my worry is that message isn't coming through. As you know, we're dedicated to you as people. These are things that are shifting within our own business model, and how do we prepare you? Because at some point in time, it will come very fast, even though it's been coming for decades. But also us as an organization, how do we help facilitate that locally so that it's not pandemonium and it's not economic ruin? That's the last thing that we want to do. We've worked really hard as a community to build sustainability and to build a community in the very traditional sense. So yeah, any advice or insight you have to that one, I would appreciate that immensely.